All right, so I'm going to go through the parts of the eye you have to know. First of all, the whites of your eye is called the sclera. It's a tough fibrous tissue to protect the eyeball. And around front, the sclera becomes clear so you can see, and that's called the cornea. Behind the cornea, in what we call the posterior, this is all the anterior chamber, but the posteriorly to the cornea in the anterior chamber is fluid called aqueous humor that keeps the shape of the cornea. It maintains the cornea as far as giving it nutrients, because the cornea itself doesn't have any blood vessels or nerves. That's why you can do corneal transplants and not have any rejection, because there's really nothing there. It's just transparent material. The light goes through the cornea, through the aqueous humor, and it will go into this hole. And that hole is your pupil, and it's just a hole. It looks black because you're looking at the back of the eye. The pupil size changes because of the iris, and that iris has muscles in it, ciliary muscles, that can constrict and make the pupil smaller or dilate. If you go into a dark room, it takes about 20 minutes before that pupil size can adapt and get bigger, dilate, to make sure that you can see in the darkness. That's why movies always have about 20 minutes worth of, if we can ever see movies again in the theater, but there's about 20 minutes worth of movies to come. If you time it, you'll see, so you adapt for the main show. Then if we take, there's three major layers of the eye. This layer where the muscles are attached is your sclera. If we take the sclera off, the next layer is your choroid coat. The choroid coat is not very pretty in us. In hoofed animals, it's very pretty. It's iridescent, turquoise and purple, but in us it's brown. And that choroid coat contains the blood vessels and nerves. And then if we look inside of that, that's your retina. And the retina contains your rods and your cones. Cones are for color, rods are for black and white. There's a little spot, this is right here is what we call, this is the optic nerve coming in, cranial nerve number 2. And there's a blind spot right there where the nerve comes in where you can't see. But right above that is where you see the best, and that's called the macula. And it contains the most cones, and that's where you see the best vision. Sometimes people, when you'll see animals cock their head even to get focused on that macula. It's also called the fovea centralis. There is a gel-like material to give the shape to the eyeball back here in the posterior chamber, and that gel is the vitreous humor. And this little depression here is showing you that macula, or the luteum the fovea centralis, where you see the best. And right in front of this, right behind the pupil, is your lens. And your lens changes shape as you focus close and distant. Now, when people are nearsighted and farsighted, it's usually because of the shape of their eyeball. It doesn't have that much to do with the lens. If you have astigmatism, astigmatisms have to do with the shape, sometimes of the cornea, and also in the lens it's not perfectly flat. There's little irregularities, and so you get some blurriness. You can still see. So a little different structural deal for that eye problem. So again, this is where your optic nerve is coming in, and put back, again, the retina, the choroid coat. Retina is very thin, easily tears. And then we've got the sclera. So that's it for the eyeball. Let's go on to the ear. So you'll need to know the cranial nerve for the ear. Here's the cranial nerve. I'll turn it. It's connected to what we call cochlea here, and connected to the semicircular canals. Oops. So we'll get to that in a minute. So if we look at the ear, the outer ear here is called the pinna. Sometimes it's called the auricle. It is cartilage. It's elastic cartilage, so it's very bendable, and it does move a little to collect sound. So the pinna and the auditory canal here, which is sometimes called ear canal, those comprise what we call the outer ear. Sound goes through there. It hits this structure called the tympanic membrane. You commonly call it the eardrum. You're going to learn tympanic membrane. And that vibrates that membrane. We've now entered into the middle ear. The middle ear contains that tympanic membrane and 3 little bones. You do not have to know the names of the bones in human bio. You just call them ossicles. And those little bones vibrate. Meanwhile, there's a tube coming up from your pharynx. And that tube is your Eustachian tube. It's also called the auditory tube. And that maintains pressure. If you blow your nose sometimes and close it, your ears will pop because you're pushing air through here, and then playing sometimes because pressure, it hurts your ears. It's hard to maintain that pressure, rebalance. So your middle ear, your tympanic membrane, your bones will vibrate, and when they vibrate, they send the sound waves in through a little part here called an oval window. I'm not sure that's in your lab manual, is it? Yes, it is. And then that will vibrate here into what we call the vestibule. You don't have to know that. And then you have these 3 semicircular canals, and you can see that they're orientated. So one's up and down, and one's horizontal, and one is oblique. And that's to help you. There's little crystals in there, and there's little hairs, and there's fluid. And every time you move, these are telling you where you're at in time and space. Sometimes if you've ever been on a ride that spins you and you get off the ride and it still feels like you're spinning, it's because the fluid and the crystals are still moving in here. And until they settle down, you don't know exactly which way you're going. Some people, if they get vertigo, those crystals get stuck. And if they get stuck, you stand up and the body goes, I don't know where you're at in time and space, and you get dizzy and you can fall back to the ground. The hearing part of your ear is called the cochlea. It looks like a snail. And that's loaded with hairs, again, and fluid. And those hairs, when they're vibrated, they send information to the temporal part of the brain so we can interpret what we're hearing into sounds and give them a name. This is cranial nerve. It's called the vestibular cochlear nerve. You have to know that cranial nerve. And that's for hearing and for balance, both. The vestibular part's for balance, the cochlear part is for hearing. So the ear's pretty simple, I think. Harder to put this model back together. So that's it for the ear.